Hello and welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is the show where every week I look at a book that was highly influential to James Ellroy, a book that moved him, inspired him, thrilled him. And I usually start each episode with a joke, but this episode I'm just going to start with a little announcement. I've been following James's interviews in the foreign press because the translated editions of The Enchanters have been coming out. And I've noticed an increasing tone of aggressiveness in these interviews. There was an interview in France that had to be aborted because he was so monosyllabic, and that led him to getting a very bad review, which was unheard of in France, where he's always been kind of the god of American writers. And there was one that swiftly followed in Spain that kind of followed of a kind of very, very similar tone. And it made me think there are two James Ellroys. The one James Ellroy is incredibly generous, kind, supportive, as well as being incredibly funny, gifted, nails every anecdote, great company to be around. And then the other James is where the kind of aggressiveness goes too far and he becomes just a little bit of a bore. I mean, if you start saying you hate everyone, you kind of just become boring very quickly. And I've seen a little bit more of the second James in these recent interviews, and it just made me think that there's part of James that would get a kick out of this show. He'd like me talking about him and his books, and there's another part of James that would just hate it because he'd hate me drawing equivalence between him and other writers. But right now we're here for the James who is just remarkably gifted and has just given so much to the world through his writing. And that's the James I really want to celebrate. And to do so, we are going to look at today's book, which is A Rage in Harlem by Chester Himes. Now, if you recognize this cover, it's because this is one of the Vintage Crime Black Lizard reprints that I began discussing in last week's show. And Ellroy has written the introduction to all of these books. So Ellroy has great admiration for Chester Himes, which he goes into in this in the introduction to this volume. So let's talk a little bit about who Chester Himes was. He was an African American author who was born in 1909 in Jefferson City, Missouri. His family moved around a lot because the father was a teacher, and early in his life he underwent a tragedy because he was pulled from a gunpowder demonstration by his mother that he was supposed to do, but his brother went ahead with it, mixed the chemicals wrongly in school, and the chemicals exploded in his face, blinding him. He was rushed to hospital, but unfortunately, because of the Jim Crow laws, this was considered a white hospital, and they turned him away. They turned this young boy away, even though he was in absolute agony. He was blinded. He had acid scalding his face. And Chester Himes, in his memoir, The Quality of Hurt, described that as the most hurtful thing he's ever experienced in his life. He loved his brother, and it was heartrending to see him in such pain and turned away in his hour of need. So Chester Himes's early life was difficult. He went to university, but he was expelled after a prank. He fell in hard times, and he actually did time for armed robbery. But it was during a stint in prison that kind of rescued him because he discovered writing and he started to get some short stories published. Then, when he got out of prison, he spent some time in Hollywood working as a screenwriter for Warner Brothers. And he was getting his first novels published, which were very, very literary based, protest novels they were considered at the time. His debut novel, If He Hollers Let Him Go, it got fantastic reviews by highbrow critics. But unfortunately, Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers, found out that a black man was writing screenplays and didn't like it and had him sacked. So that's another example of the kind of racist abuse he was getting. Eventually, Himes moved to France and was part of the literary salon there. But he was kind of at a crossroads because he'd earned a lot of literary acclaim and critical respect, but he still hadn't made enough money even to earn a living, never mind become wealthy. And it was Marcel Duchamel who was the editor of the French series noir novels which put American hardboiled fiction into print in France and made them incredibly popular and also critically respected. France was really a place where you could, straddle both at the time. In America and also really in Britain, it crime fiction didn't have that both critical and commercial success to the same degree. So Chester Himes began the Harlem Detective series. The first novel, its original title was somewhat literary. It's called For the Love of Imabel, but it's been reissued as A Rage in Harlem, which gives it more of a hard-boiled title. And he introduced his series characters, Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones. And they're two black detectives in Harlem. They are incredibly tough. They they tend to go easy on the numbers operators, the gamblers, the street hustlers, the low level crimes. If they think that if they're not violent, then they deal with them relatively benevolently. They say, be smooth, don't make graves, because they will be violent with violent criminals, gangsters, armed robbers, those sorts. They will mete out violence, but we respect them because we know that Chester Himes here is portraying a fallen world, and they need to be violent to survive. Although on one level, of course, by today's standards, they are quite corrupt. Now, in this, the first novel of the series, they're actually not in it that much. I was surprised by how kind of marginalized they are. Our lead character is Jackson, who's a street guy, very stupid, but also very endearing. So when we first see him, he's been hoodwinked by these con artists who persuade him that they've got this formula where if you take $1 bills and heat them in the oven under these special conditions, they'll come out as $10 bills. Anyway, he gets completely ripped off. He gets arrested in the process. He has to bribe the U.S. Marshal. He's just like, this guy's not cut out for prison. He's just like, please, anything, and you name the sum and I'll pay it. So the Marshal does accept a bribe, but of course he's already lost all his money to these con artists. So he loans the money from his employer, who becomes a regular character in the series because he works for an undertaker. He loans this undertaker's money. He loses that too. There's various very amusing con artist schemes going on. There are tickets to heaven schemes sold by these fake nuns who are actually men. In nuns' outfits, and there's also an ongoing scheme about con artists walking around with a suitcase full of gold ore, and they say this is to persuade very, very dumb people to invest because they've come across this gold mine in Mexico. And the reason Jackson's done all of this is because he's fallen for a woman, Imabel, and he does all this to impress her, to have the money, to give her the high life she has become accustomed to, which is very, very beautiful woman. She's described as high yellow in the book, and there's a lot of racial terms that we wouldn't use today. But he's got it bad for this woman. She's described as trouble. She's bad tricks. And so really, it's really Jackson's story until he rubs up against Coffin Ed and Gravedigger. And in some ways, they kind of bail him out of this trouble that he's always getting himself into. But without giving too much away, one of the detectives is written out the story quite fast because he gets acid in the eyes. A perp throws acid in his eyes. He's hospitalized, and it's an interesting thing. Acid to the eyes is probably going to write you off as a leading series character indefinitely. But I feel that the scene in question is highly inspired by Chester Himes, what happened to his brother as a boy, and it's really Chester Himes working through his demons. So the novel is really brilliantly done. James Ellroy is in his introduction talks about his admiration for this novel. It's late 1950s New York, early 1960s, and he talks about there's a lot going on, and Harlem is considered something of a war zone at the time. I mean, I stayed in Harlem um, just last May for the Edgar Awards for Ellroy's biography, ironically, and we stayed in a beautiful 19th century house. There was a Steinway piano, and there was just um, it was just beautiful interior design, and it was actually that house is used frequently for filming of the Latin telenovelas. And Harlem itself had changed so much. Sugar Hill and all of those places, gentrification had really made them just stunningly beautiful. But the Harlem here is a war zone, and the novel is kind of written in the kind of jive speak that Himes knows so well. He knows the streets so well. He knows the intersections. He knows even the even the parking lots. The um, all of the locations, the cafes and the bars and the dives and where the street hustlers and the pimps and the prostitutes go. Now, to a certain extent, James Ellroy's managed to emulate that kind of jive speak in his own novels, and not just jive speak, but also Yiddish and hipster patois and all manner of dialects in Ellroy's novels are intermingle and intermerge. So you can be reading one and then you can be reading another as we jump from one character to another. And this is probably another area where changing tastes and changing expectations, you know, changing ideas of race politics have kind of brought this into um, disrepute. There's a sensitivity warning in this novel. In fact, all of the blacklisted Adventure Crime reprints I've read so far have sensitivity warnings. Even like Ruth Rendell, it says these novels were written in their time and they used the language and the attitudes of the time. And Ellroy himself, I know, got a little bit in trouble with this. Well, I mean, more than once. Vikram Yayanti, who's the Sephardic Jewish director of the very good Ellroy documentary Feast of Death. Ellroy, when he met him, he tried to show off some of his Yiddish speak, and this guy was not impressed. But Ellroy is a very gifted writer, and he has used Times for inspiration in a lot of the ambience and the atmosphere and just the general evocation of place and time and character in his own novels. There were 8 finished novels in the Harlem Detective series and 1 unfinished novel. There have been 3 films. The first 2 films were kind of classics of the blaxploitation era. Then A Rage in Harlem was very, very loosely adapted under the same title. In 1990 it came out. And that one kind of borders on parody. And it's highly entertaining. It doesn't follow the book very much at all. But it veers very, very kind of confusingly in terms of tone between a kind of straight thriller and a parody. And it kind of works on both levels, depending on how you wish to watch it. But like when you merge the 2 levels together, I don't think it quite works as well as it does in the book. Whereas that this feels just like a very, very natural book. And Chester Himes found a success and a happiness in France that he never unfortunately found in America. Even when it looked like he was going to break through, he married a white woman who became his champion, his editor, and has really looked after his legacy and estate. And they eventually moved to Spain, where he died. And he leaves behind an incredible legacy of crime fiction. And also, his early literary novels are very, very important. But if he hadn't turned to crime fiction, the chances are we wouldn't be remembering him now as a great literary figure. And that's the irony. It happens so often in the lives of crime writers. Maybe not so much now, because writers are turning to crime as their first port of call. There's no kind of there's no sniffiness about genre anymore. At least not that I encounter in the academy, because academics have been writing about crime fiction and getting it published in peer-reviewed journals for 30 years or more. And Chester Himes one of the greatest. And start at the beginning, A Rage in Harlem, and get to know Coffin Ed and Gravedigger. They are two of the great detective duos, and I think you're going to enjoy this book very much. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.